This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trappe. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network, available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Hey, what's going on, business storytellers? Today we want to talk about AI and how AI tools are impacting corporate communications teams. What's interesting to me about this topic certainly is, I use AI all the time. And if you've looked at christophtrappe.com recently, I put a disclaimer on the top: 98% human written content. Haha. It's not even a joke. It is 98%. You know why? Because I use an AI headline generator. I also use Grammarly, which fixes all the mistakes I will never learn to fix in the rest of my life. So I've given up on those. But what other things do we need to know about? What other things do we need to think about when it comes to AI in our communications strategies? So Chris Keefe, he is the Chief Product Officer at Poppulo. He is joining me today. We're going to flash the URL at the bottom there most of the time. So if you want to check out the company, go for it. But let's see what Chris has to say about what's AI doing in the corporate communications space. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Christoph, for having me.
Really appreciate you making the time. Happy Friday. Of course, who knows when the podcast comes out? Might not be Friday, but this is a rare Friday afternoon episode. So certainly an interesting topic to wrap up the week with. Now, tell me about what is currently going on when it comes to AI tools in the corporate communication world. What are people doing already? What's the impact? And what should we think about?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, both for our customers who are typically professional communicators, as well as just product teams in general. What was once very difficult is now much easier to accomplish. And there's incredible gains that can be made in productivity, efficiency, and how they're thinking about comm strategy overall. And this can go from, how content is generated, whether it's templates, writing assistants, the transformation of content from one channel like mobile to another like an email, as well as how you're analyzing and interpreting that content. So I think we're just at sort of the beginning of what it looks like for corporations, and it's really exciting, some of the things they can accomplish right now.
It is super interesting what's going on out there. And, so the one thing I did, so yesterday, somebody on LinkedIn, I don't remember who it was, but they posted something about, I've got all these applicants today, and I can tell who used AI for their cover letter. And I'm thinking, who still submits cover letters? But let's put that topic aside. And so I thought, hey, you know what I should do? I should send my LinkedIn URL to ChatGPT and say, write me a cover letter for head of content marketing based on this profile. And ChatGPT did. I gave it to my wife. I showed it to her. And I'm thinking, this is not horrible. Like, it's not super unique, but like for that purpose, it worked. Now, the reason I'm going to ask you about this here is because I'm a believer in unique stories, unique content. For that cover letter, it was close enough. I mean, seriously. But I don't know that ChatGPT would be close enough for my original unique blog content where I have to give my opinion or whatever. So like, how do teams find that balance to use AI? What level of AI do they use? And how do they think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, you're right. AI is definitely not going to be a replacement for human creativity or human connections or what is true strategic business storytelling with an organization. When I work with enterprise customers and we're talking about their strategy, it's natural to think about this in the form of an aid to begin with. It's going to accelerate getting you from 0 to 1. That way you do have something that is good enough to start working upon. But ultimately bringing it from that point to something that you think represents the tone and the quality and the culture of the organization, that's definitely not something that we would want to leave to the hands of AI. But as far as reducing the time it takes to create that initial draft, the potential editing of that draft, that way you can really truly focus on working with your stakeholders and leaders from across the organization. That's really where you have that massive time savings. In addition to that, it's all about data, and there's a lot of time that goes into analyzing, interpreting results. Did I reach all my employees? Were they engaged? Did they, have the call to action or the outcome that I anticipated? Being able to speed up that process of analysis, interpretation, in order to get to true recommendations that drive outcomes is also a major benefit that organizational communicators can start taking advantage of right away.
It is very interesting. I really like the comment about it's a brainstorming tool. So the other thing, while I was in Chat GPT last night, I asked Chat GPT to please write me a book chapter about whether or not marketing is a good career. And I do, as you may or may not know, I published a book earlier this year, and it's called Is Marketing a Good Career? And I would never publish what Chat GPT gave me as is. But the one thing it did give me, it was like, oh, there's a couple things I didn't think about, right? Like, this is a good idea. This is a thought starter. Maybe I should do a chapter on this one topic that I didn't talk about previously. So I think the brainstorming piece is important. But how do you tie the brainstorming? Let's kind of elaborate on that for a moment. How do you tie that together with a human brainstorming? I'll give you an example. I use my headline writer, right? My AI headline writer. It is literally like, I remember the days, Chris, when we would have meetings and say, okay, what are the keywords we're after? Let's brainstorm. Let's brainstorm a headline. It's literally replacing that meeting. I do not need that meeting because I have that. So how do you figure out the human brainstorming part? When do you bring in the machine? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the key role of any organizational communicator is to be at the strategic center of what's happening in the organization. And that is, clearly defining the outcome, how we're going to assess the impact of our comm strategy against that outcome, and what are the, the tactics that we're going to implement. And you also have to keep in mind that, organizations have their own, obviously, culture, their internal tone. There's a wealth of data that informs data models as far as how this organization, communicates and has had success with that communication. And so you're right, when it comes to writing a headline or, transforming a long form article into a short form post that might go out to a different type of channel, accelerating from the content you already have and the tone of the organization that's already been created into those automatically generated content items is really part of that, brainstorming activity. You don't want to automate that send, press enter and send out to everyone, but that's the beginning of the collaboration with AI as far as how you're going to create that content. I think the other thing that's interesting is, attaching media to content used to be very timely. It can be very costly, high quality imagery or videos that support these text-based messages. Now with the ability to generate those as a part of the brainstorming activity or ideation process and be able to do that for all comms, not just the most important ones, is pretty incredible to think about too.
It really is. And I haven't used some of the AI technology to create images. Evan Kirstel, who was on here, he talked about that for a little bit, how you do that. But certainly those are all opportunity, especially other media. But how about how do you feel about video content? And I actually did in my day job at Vox Pop Me, I did a live stream podcast interviewing an AI robot, right? So the AI robot answered the question. So you can create video interviews with AI, but how do you feel about that? Is that too far? I mean, doing it one time to experiment is fun, but doing that this is an authentic conversation might be going too far of a road, don't you think? Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, at least for the corporate space, I definitely think that's too far of a road. I think that route removes the human connection, the personal touch, and that authenticity that organizations are trying to create in their culture. When I think about, video creation, it's really about reducing the time it takes on these, highly laborious, repetitive tasks of what would go into video production. if I'm trying to create a campaign around employee engagement of a new wellness program, or I'm trying to create a campaign around diversity, equity, and inclusion, the ability to, have that content generated based on the tone of our messaging and our corporate culture, and provide options as far as how I want to append that to my messaging dynamically and produce that in a video medium, which is great for a lot of these channels. That's where I think the biggest opportunity is, less so, replacing, the human voice, I suppose.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because I remember back in the day when I first started doing social media marketing, people were on my case that I scheduled my posts, right? Because they were saying, well, that's inauthentic if you don't schedule them, if you don't post them live. But I've never thought that was inauthentic, because at the end of the day, it's still what I'm saying. I just don't spit it out at once, right? It's just kind of, so I think it's an interesting way to think of it. When you talk about corporate communications, do you have any examples on how corporate communications teams either use AI already, or what's the quickest way to get started? What's if you do this, here's how it can help out of the gate?
Yeah, well, I'd say it's still early for corporate communications. Some are very excited, some are resistant, some are a little fearful, and it's just starting to make its way into some of our early adopters. Yeah, I think the easiest way to get started is really as a communicator assistant, as an aid. So much time is spent taking content from another stakeholder, editing it, revising it, generating it. It really takes away from the opportunities you have to be more strategic, and really work on the outcomes or the effectiveness of the campaigns you're trying to create. And so that'll accelerate, a lot of things, again, getting from kind of 0 to 1. And that's where I see corporate communicators really getting started. And the ones that are doing it well are also starting to put together, what is their governance plan? What and how are they going to use AI within the organization? And how are they going to communicate and educate others, both those that are receiving AI-assisted comms and those that are generating it? I think it's really starting there, and eventually all tools that we use, I think will have this form of capability built into it. So that's really the first place it's all going to get started.
I think as an aid is very interesting. Also, where can you replace certain things? I'll give you an example. I used to have a freelance editor, and Grammarly literally replaced that role, right?
100%,
and it's way cheaper now. That editing role was mostly proofreading and grammar, so you still kind of could use an editor, big strategic thinking. What does it have to do with the strategy? And Grammarly can't do that yet. When you talk about internal and external corporate communications, what's the role of AI? And I'm hoping there's an answer, because it'd be awesome. But what's the role of distributing content at the right time? I'll give you an example. It is the timing when I get emails, or even the timing when I get Slack messages, or the timing when I get whatever. Anything is so important, right? Because if I'm really working on something or I'm busy, I might just delete the email. Unless it depends who it's from. But, I've had CEOs who send out these quarterly updates and nobody reads them, because it's just you have to get through 2 pages of marketing gobbledygook. So what do you think the AI role is in getting it to people at the right time, to get it consumed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm definitely a firm believer that delivering the right message at the right time on the right channel in the format that's going to drive the best engagement and consumption is critical. Whether you're using AI or not, that level of personalization is really key to any audience and the experience that you want them to have with your content. Right now, Poppulo already has the ability to do very high levels of personalization where, based on your time, your geography, your language of preference, how you like to consume, where you like to consume, we are learning from that and targeting the content. And this is something that's, been in the industry for a while. But the amount of time and effort that went into that interpretation of how people are engaging, where they're engaging, what they prefer to engage with, took a lot of time, and it was a lot of manual effort, right? Now we have this wealth of data at our disposal. And so not only can we see where someone engaged and if they engaged, did they like it, did they comment? We can also see, what was the format of the content that they were viewing. What was the difference between that content and other pieces of media that might have been associated with it? What dynamic themes are coming out of posts and articles within the organization that are trending in a similar way? All of this starts to build up a knowledge base that goes into best practices that become recommendations and automation, and how that content will be retargeted in the future. And so a lot of these concepts were in existence in the corporate world and in products like the one that we have. But now you can think about just an acceleration of many years of what we were capable of in just a few months.
Well, and what I'm excited about too is when I heard the term automation. Certainly automation can be a challenge here and there depending on what we're doing. But when you were just talking about that, I'm thinking I can see, like, I don't even know what to call them, but veteran employees who would say, this is why we do it at this time, because we know, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's literally a thought process. And then I'm thinking today, when I schedule my social media posts, I don't even pick the time anymore. The platform just goes, this is when we recommend you send it. This is when it's going. If you disagree, you can change it. But I never disagree because they have it. The platform has the data. So what you're describing is very similar, right? Like automated at the right time based on where people are, based on what they've done before. So that's a real differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just automate it, but learn from that automation. It's a continuing, living, breathing cycle where if you didn't resonate or hit, it's self-learning and will continue to improve. So that's, really the most exciting part.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about, I'm always got to be negative Nelly here for a few minutes. But what are some of the downfalls when we think about AI? I mean, certainly, I'll give you another example. I don't remember what I used, but I asked Chat GPT. I think it was Chat GPT. I'm pretty sure it was. And I said, tell me about what Christoph Trappe, content marketer Christoph Trappe, what he does. And I'm pretty sure maybe it was not Chat GPT. I should not badmouth him if I'm not sure. But whoever I used, they said, they confused me with Joe Polizzi, which, I mean, that's nice. Thank you, right? To be confused with Joe Polizzi is fine. But I'm not Joe Polizzi. So like there is real danger, depending on what you use AI for, that it makes a mistake because it doesn't know or it doesn't get the context.
No, there definitely is. AI can get it wrong. AI can have biases that it can pick up from the data that it's interpreting. And that's why it really isn't a replacement for, again, human creativity or connection. It's really a tool. It's a tool to help us do more, achieve more, reach more, but you don't want to give it too much control. So when I think about automation, it really is, maybe driving effectiveness of how you're reaching and engaging based on employee preference and, how they prefer to receive content. It might be automation of repetitive tasks, but I certainly wouldn't want to end up with automation of the end result. For me, that would be, too much control. And it also just raises, ethical concerns. And I think that's where those, guidelines that you need to make sure you're working on with your organization as far as how and when you will utilize AI, not just as a communication tool, but as a productivity tool across departments is really going to be key to your success. But it can be wrong. And giving it too much control would not be, the best outcome for an organization at this time.
What's interesting too about that is I got the same problem sometimes with my headlines when I write them or when I put them in the system, and then it gives me some ideas, and I'm like, that's not even what this topic is. So it's not understanding it. So even AI needs an editor, but nonetheless, it can be helpful. It is helpful. I mean, when I think about that cover letter we talked about earlier, even if I edit it, it's still got the thing going for me, right? I mean, some of the standard stuff that's in there. Are there any other downfalls we have to think about as a team? And how do we even start? Like, where's the starting point? I'm always interested in that. I started with Grammarly, AI headline generator. What's like the first step for a corp team to figure out? And is that internal or external? Where do you see the biggest opportunity?
Well, I think that the biggest place to start is really around education. Like the market is moving so quickly, capabilities are moving so quickly. We're all seeing headlines every day on sort of the good, the bad of what's going on out there associated with the technology. But it's very exciting. And I don't think most people really understand like what it means to their business and what it means to their comm strategy and what it really means as a tool. And so I do think like having that right level of education is key. And again, making sure that you've got the right guidelines or governance in place to make sure that you're starting to evaluate opportunities for it in the right way. At that point, it's really around, how do we want to test this? How do we want to get started? Is it more around productivity and like reducing the time it takes us to do X? Is it really more about content quality and being able to produce more meaningful content experiences? Or is it really more about driving more engagement and personalization? I think we're all kind of getting started with this for the first time and making sure that you've got a clear outcome in mind and you've identified like the partners that'll be able to help you with that. And then you can test that result is going to be key. But I think it does start with education. There's so much information and misinformation out there right now. You really have to have that strong baseline.
You have to have that strong baseline. The other thing that when you talk about education that I was reminded of is I went to a AI conference many years ago. I don't know how many years ago, 5 years ago maybe. And one of the sessions was, is this AI? Is that AI?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people think
a lot of times it's not AI. Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's a cool thing, but it's actually not AI. It's just like a workflow or something. Tell me about your company. What do you do? Who should reach out? Who should work with you? And how does that look?
Yeah, absolutely. So Poppulo is an enterprise communications platform, and our product is called Harmony. We work with very large organizations so they can achieve their communications goals. This is both for internal employee communications as well as customer-facing communications. And we have the ability to, essentially create, publish, personalize, target across any channel in which an organization needs to reach and engage all of their audience, whether it's mobile, collaboration tools, digital signage, email. And so we provide a variety of tools that allow you to, one, create the communications to a high level of quality, target and personalize it, and then all of the analytics that you would need to ensure that you're reaching that audience and improving the outcome for next time. Work with 47 of the Fortune 100. And so if you've got those types of communication goals, we're a great partner.
The one thing, maybe we can touch on this really quickly. What's the importance of getting internal communications right? I mean, I'm thinking of some leaders who are, they're like football coaches. This is the strategy. Let's go, move it forward, right? And then on the other flip side, you have leaders who say, well, we have to get individual buy-in from every single person along the way, and that's impossible too, right? And so is the other side. But there's a middle ground somewhere, right? You have to get the message across. You have to make sure people understand it, and then they can make a decision one way or another how they want to participate or not. Why is internal communication, especially, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in my opinion, why is that more important than ever?
I mean, communications is at the heart of every organization, and it's critical to any outcome that the business is trying to achieve. How you're engaging with employees, how you're communicating what they need to know and what to do. It's really, how we can all move forward in harmony, which is really, how we produce the name of the platform. It's so critical that comms is a seat at the table in strategy and working directly with leadership, because it really does make a massive difference. I think we've all felt what it's like when you don't feel engaged with the organization that you work for, and potentially you aren't getting the communications you need. Kind of creates that mistrust, potentially misalignment. And so, it really is critical to success. I would say now, especially that we're all remote and we may not be able to see our leadership on a daily basis in person or even our teams, how we communicate and how we drive effectiveness with a remote workforce and keep them engaged is even more important. It drives up the need for comms even more so than it was a few years ago.
Yeah, it's very different to communicate with people when they're not right in front of your face. Now, really quickly, first of all, I really appreciate you coming on, Chris, and sharing your insights. When you talk about especially people being remote, are you more of a fan of a lot of content at once or smaller pieces of content more often?
It's a good question. Noise does not help anyone, meaning a lot of content coming at you. And oftentimes, even like employee generated content can create a lot of noise. Where we really focus is on that highly personalized, targeted, and relevant stream of content that you need to engage with the organization and drive action. And so, that's part of the balance in how you structure your campaigns, how you structure your messaging, the right balance of relevant content while also not increasing the noise, because we only have so much time in the day. We can only consume so much information. And so that's why these tools are so important, to strip out the noise and make sure you really are getting down to the messages that matter.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your network.